no squawk, and approaching our air defense identification zone. I scrambled F-15 fighters from Portland, Oregon, along with a KC-135 tanker support from Fairchild Air Force Base, Washington.
Here we go. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to break down the F-15s that were scrambled into Montana and how that may have been related to the F-16s shooting down a contact over Lake Huron. Stay to the very end of the video because I'm going to give a full debrief on whether I think it was related, and then we're going to talk about what we can learn from this situation about the speeds of what these octagonal drone type objects with strings hanging off of them are flying at. Let's talk about how that Montana object was found. So on February 11th at 4:45 p.m., North American Aerospace Defense Command finds the contact. But how are they able to find it? Well, every single day, NORAD is using radars to scan the skies to protect the United States' airspace, primarily from ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and aircraft that are trying to illegally enter our airspace. They monitor the approach corridors coming into America, and they monitor all domains, is what NORAD says. So that would be airspace and cyberspace. So NORAD's gonna detect that contact. It's gonna be flying 70 nautical miles north of the Canadian border, and it's a contact on the radar that they're not normally used to seeing, but they've changed the technology slightly since the Chinese spy balloon to be able to interpret raw data differently and more effectively to find things that might be a part of a spy network. And this object wasn't squawking, which means sending out the appropriate code that the FAA requires, especially if you're going to fly through an ADIZ, which is an air defense identification zone, where going through that, you need to make sure that the country you're going into knows. So you got to be squawking the appropriate code. Like, for example, you got to be like, hey, no worries, nothing to see here. I'm just a 737 going from Canada to Cancun, just need to get some sunshine. But once we realized that this track wasn't following any of those appropriate procedures, NORAD's gonna launch fighter jets. They're gonna launch 2 F-15Cs out of Portland, Oregon, and 1 KC-135 out of Fairchild Air Force Base. And that's the package that's gonna go up there to try to intercept this thing, hopefully directly at the same time that it crosses the American border. So at 6 p.m. Eastern time, that contact is gonna cross the American border into Montana, and the fighter jets at this point, my guess is they are just ready to rock. They're probably in max afterburner, trying to get there as fast as they can. The tanker is gonna follow them, and they know, hey, we can burn a ton of gas because we've got a gas station in the sky that'll be waiting, 15, 20 nautical miles away from us, so we can burn all this fuel right now. They probably kept it just under supersonic to not create any sonic booms, and then they're gonna arrive on station at 7:04 p.m. So that's pretty solid to get there just an hour after it arrived over American airspace. And then they're gonna set up a patrol around this object, and they're gonna do everything they can to try to spot it. But keep in mind, it's near dark. You're right around sunset at 7:04 p.m. So ultimately, this is gonna be tough. This is gonna be when the visuals are changing, colors are changing, light is gonna be reduced. So now you're looking at a challenge where you can't really see well as far as using your eyeballs, and you can't really use night vision goggles because there's too much light still for those night vision goggles to be affected. So I'm sure these pilots are just getting a little frustrated trying to find this track. They're going to circle around it a few different times, and then ultimately they're not going to be able to find it. And one of the factors of why they're not able to find it is because there is no data link up in that area. Data link is a technology that literally transmits ground-based radar information into the cockpit of your fighter jet. Yeah, this is Gucci technology, but unfortunately, it didn't exist over Montana. My assumption is, we're like, well, it's Montana. Why do we need it to transmit up there? But again, the enemy is gonna try to think like you think. They're gonna try to find weaknesses. So there's definitely a weakness in the system. I can guarantee you there's a team of people right now making sure that we have data link up in that area. And the way that data link works is it allows you to cue in your own sensors on those radar tracks from that ground-based radar. So you're gonna see that in your cockpit, you're gonna be able to cue in your radar onto that, and then in your heads-up display, you'd see a box around that contact, and that would get your eyeballs onto it, so then you could do an intercept. So unfortunately, those F-15C pilots are gonna go home empty-handed, and then NORAD's gonna lose track of that radar contact. They're gonna call it an anomaly, which was interesting when I first heard it. I thought, oh, okay, maybe it was just some failure in the technology or something like that. But no, they've tracked this thing for over 100 miles coming from Canada. So it's definitely not what I would call a radar anomaly. I would just say somehow this thing dropped radar lock. This thing reappears over Wisconsin, and they're not going to say it's exactly for sure the same track, but they're going to say likely this is the same track that was over Montana. NORAD's going to elect to scramble fighter jets again. It's game time, baby. Let's get some more jets up there. So they're going to scramble fighter jets out of Madison, Wisconsin. They're going to scramble a tanker out of Pittsburgh's Air National Guard Base, and then an AWACS is going to come up from Tinker. Now that AWACS is going to help provide information to the fighters, and that's what the F-15Cs didn't have. So they didn't have that same advantage. So this AWACS is now going to be able to transmit information to these F-16s and make sure the same thing doesn't happen. And it's daylight, it's the afternoon, so there's a lot more advantages for these F-16s to actually get a hold of this thing. So the fighters are going to intercept it, and yep, they're going to determine it's not a per se military threat where it can drop something, which is called a kinetic threat. They're going to say, you know, it's an object, octagonal shaped with strings hanging off of it. Very strange. Definitely makes me think of more of like an electronic warfare, because there's different types of warfare, not just kinetic. You know, there's collecting of information, there's espionage, there's way more things that an object can do rather than just kinetic force. So the F-16s are going to monitor this thing after it crosses the upper peninsula of Michigan, and then once it's about 15 nautical miles off the coast of Michigan, over Lake Huron, they're going to be cleared hot, and they're going to send it. They're going to send an AIM-9X that's going to smack into this thing, and you're probably asking, you know, an AIM-9X is a heat-seeking missile. How is it hitting this thing if this has no visual propulsion, which is sending out heat like an enemy fighter jet would? Well, an AIM-9X actually sees in the IR spectrum, and it can sense differences in light. So it's going to see a difference in light on that object, and that's why it's able to smack it. And once it does, that object is going to start drifting. So it's using propulsion to move around. It's going to get hit by the AIM-9X, and it's going to start drifting into the waters. It's determined to crash somewhere in Canadian waters, and currently recovery operations are underway. You made it to the end, so time for that bonus debrief, time for the bonus round. We're going to talk about the speed of this thing. So when it was depicted over Havre, Montana, it's going to drop that radar lock and then reappear several hours later overnight is what the official transcripts are going to say. So for ease of math, let's just say that was 6 hours later. It's 1,200 miles roughly from Havre, Montana, over to the east side of Wisconsin. So you're looking at an object that's moving at about 200 miles per hour. So definitely no balloon is going to be able to move that fast. It's worth noting though, you've got the jet stream, which is a strong stream of air moving from west to east at potentially up to 100 miles per hour. So if that was 100 miles per hour, the jet stream, now we're looking at an object that can move itself at 100 miles an hour without any visual form of propulsion, you know, shooting an afterburner or shooting any type of exhaust out of the back. So definitely interesting. And I think that can just help us understand what these things are. You know, the fact that it's not moving incredibly fast, but it's got the ability to move itself will hopefully help us detect these things and determine the flight path of them in the future. And then the second point, again, is just armchair quarterbacking, but this was depicted in Canada prior to crossing into the United States. So if I was a Canadian fighter pilot flying the F-18, I'd be sitting there like, put me in, coach, let's go. Let's get this thing before it gets to the border of the US so that Canada can get a kill on whatever these things are. But at the end of the day, again, it's just armchair quarterbacking. So I'm glad we could break down this situation together. I'll keep you updated as things continue to develop. The best compliment you could give me is just to watch another one of these videos. I talk about whether it was a drone over Alaska that was shot down. I also get into some of the octagonal shape with strings in this video. So check them out. I think you'll get a lot out of them. Most of all, thanks for watching. Have a great day. We'll see you in the next video.